Hi, everybody. I'm here with Susan McRoberts, and we're talking about recruiter enablement. So, Susan, thank you for joining me. Give us a quick introduction to you, your background, and what you do today.
Hi, thanks for having me on, Adam. My name's Susan McRoberts. So I work 3 days a week with a scaling company actually, we've literally just rebranded today from MRM Global to hyble, so really exciting. And we'll come on to that because it's relevant to what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
And I also still do some consultancy work with other scaling companies.
Yeah. Before that, your background was mostly big enterprise HR.
Yeah, so I had 19 years with BT and loved my time there. And so come from a very big corporate environment where you have a huge employer brand and you have a huge team of HR and a huge HR team. So it's radically different when you join a scaling company as a very, very small HR team.
Yes. Okay. Tell me about recruiter enablement.
Yeah, so I touched on it already. When the rebranding of MRM Global to hyble just makes it particularly pertinent that we're talking about this today. Um, so, when the BTs or the BAs or the BPs or the
Yeah.
Virgin Monies or whoever it is go to market and are advertising jobs, we already know what they do as a company. We already have a perception of them as an employer. Their employer brand is already known to us, probably informed normally by them as a company. And so when you think about an organization like I've just said to you, MRM Global have
Yeah.
rebranded as hyble. Well, who were MRM Global to start with? You might not necessarily have even heard of MRM for us to be rebranding as hyble. And so, as small scaling companies like ours, we really need to be punching above our weight when it comes to our employer branding. And we're trying to do that with, you know, a fraction of the resource that these other much more well-known companies and brands start with. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so tell me about, in the context of recruiting, what are all the things that smaller organizations should be thinking about doing to enable their recruiters or HR teams or hiring managers?
So I think the key thing here is, as I say, it's about punching above your weight. And I think the thing is about getting as much of that, it's consistent and process driven. So spending some time upfront on each of these elements of your uh, candidate experience, your selection process, and then reusing them. Is that investment of time up front? It is thinking about how your employer brand comes across in your job adverts, and then making sure that your managers use that template. And that's not easy all the time. So they'll maybe dig out the one that they used last time, or they'll make up their own. It is really kind of making sure that you spend some time developing something and then use it consistently, and that it really, as I say, brings your brand to life. You need to spend more time on these things, but it's an investment of that time, and then make sure that you're reusing those content. So from job ads to candidate packs, designing selection processes. And I think, there's still so much opportunity here to differentiate yourself when it comes to recruitment, because the bar's quite low. I mean, even in some of the bigger organizations. So, where bigger organizations have more resource, there's not as much, the pace can be slower. So we can move a lot faster when it comes to selection processes and things. There might not necessarily have to be as many people involved in the process to be able to get to decision stage, where in bigger corporates, there might be more stages involved or more stakeholders. So you need to make the most of those things, and then also make sure that that's all designed into the process and driven consistently. So yeah, it's really kind of maximizing on your strengths as an organization and making sure that that comes out in people's experience of applying for a role with you. And as I say, the bar can be quite low generally. So there's a knack here to making it feel really personalized, because you are smaller, that can get lost sometimes. But doing that at scale when you're small, so it's a challenge, but it's achievable with the right tools and processes and documentation and just everything there to hand.
Yeah, okay. So you talked about the investment up front and reusing things. And I think my opinion of a small company versus a large company is typically in a small company, people have got like a to-do list, which is much more varied because they're all doing, like in a company like a BT, there will be somebody focused on job ads and that's their job. There will be somebody focused on the apply process and that's their job. Whereas at Highball, there's not somebody focused on those, details. So getting it right at the beginning and then templating the process and the assets means that there's less thinking time involved each time you've got to repeat the process. You definitely don't want to start from scratch. That's a killer.
Yeah.
So what are the different, sorry to get really granular here, but what are the different things that we want to create templates for, whether it's process or assets?
Yeah, I mean, so we kind of engage our managers around our recruitment process and explaining we've got a recruitment guide, we've got an outline in an email about how we'll work together with them, and we have our within that embedded links to all the templates that they need to refer to. So our job ad template, our candidate pack, our selection process, some ideas of practical exercises that they might want to run. We've got all of our comms templated. I mean, we know some of the stuff that drives candidates crazy. We know that candidates really get frustrated when they spend time applying for a role and it goes into a black hole and they never hear back. So there's no excuse for that. Even as a small organization, we have our template comms, we've thought about them really carefully, and we can use our applicant tracking system to push those out at the right stages. So there's no excuse for candidates not to hear back from an employer when they apply for a role. So all those comms, and also, again, the other thing that we know that candidates complain about, and this is the thing is, as I say, where the bar's low, we know that candidates complain and are really critical of companies not advertising salary ranges. Benchmark your roles, and put your salary range on your job adverts. Communicate with your candidates, have your comms templated and push those out through your applicant tracking system. And then spend the time designing your selection process up front and stick to it. If you spend the time designing it properly, then you won't be in that position where you're like, oh, I'm still not sure, let's just get them to meet someone else. Let's just add on another stage in this process. If you've designed the process well up front, then you shouldn't need that. And I think, we know that everybody's working at pace. So quite often it is, let's get the job advert out there. And then before you know it, you're inundated with candidates applying, and then you're making it up as you go along. So, it's really important to have all of that. So when we've got our candidate pack designs and we've got our selection process timelines and things, then we make sure that we do all of that up front so that we're not making it up as we go along, which results in that poor candidate experience, communications going missing, and people, stages being added, more hoops to jump through that candidates don't understand.
I listened to you talking about this, and I think, if I was a hiring manager in your organization, I'd be really delighted because recruitment is a lot more, there's a lot more technical aspects to it and a lot more process. There's a lot more actual procedures involved than most people would realize. So for a hiring manager, if they can just go, right, okay, here's my hiring guide, here's my paint by numbers, do this, then do this. If I don't have to think about it, I can do it faster. And it constantly amazes me the amount of talent acquisition people that I talk to in big companies who are regularly frustrated with hiring managers going rogue, doing their own thing. And I'm thinking, they probably haven't been enabled properly. So,
Yeah, it's hard, you know. I'm not saying we won't ever go rogue. There'll be times where that's appropriate, you know. So this we can't be rigid with things all the time, but we have those processes in place to make sure that we create a fair and positive candidate experience. You know, I mean, we're really just talking about this in terms of process, but you know, why we do this is so important as well, in terms of fairness, and you know, and making sure that we get the right candidate for the role, but that you know, we don't, you know, that we don't limit our approach and our attraction and our pipeline of candidates coming into the process and things. So yeah, there are, it's, you know, I've still got work to do in terms of communicating this more with hiring managers. Things change all the time, but and keeping people engaged and communicating with it. But you know, the start point is making sure that all of that's there, and working with the hiring manager early on in the process, because you know, there is nothing more frustrating than someone having started something and then you tell them afterwards, oh, did you not know, like, this was all here for you already? And they're like, oh, I didn't know, and I've gone off and already created something. You know, so it is that sunk cost fallacy where people are like, well, you might have something, but I've already done it and I'm just sticking with it. So, you know, engaging people early on so that they have it all, so that that paint by numbers is there for them and they know that, so that they've not gone off and created their own and then they become a bit more wedded to it. So, you know, we've still got work to do on that, and it's ongoing as managers change and people are working at pace. But that communication and engagement of managers is really important, and them just knowing where to go for that content.
Yes. You talked about fairness, and you know, I think this is probably a slightly underappreciated kind of notion, which is if one manager is interviewing candidates in this way and another manager is interviewing candidates in that way, then one of them's probably going to be adding more bias into the process than the other one is. And you don't want that institutionally. Your organization wants a consistent experience.
Yeah, it's so important. And I think, you know, just that, like you say, you know, helping people to understand the reasons behind the recruitment. Like, as you say, I totally agree that I think recruitment is really an underestimated subject, and I think everybody thinks it's much more straightforward than it is, and there's a lot of factors in it. And you know, even as an HR person, and as you said as well, you know, I'm an HR person with a very small team in a scaling organization, where I've come from a big corporate where we had teams that did recruitment, employee relations, reward and recognition, engagement, you know, teams and teams for all of these things. And now with my small team, we're trying to do all of that, and recruitment is just one of those things. And then when you take recruitment, there's a whole load of stuff that sits underneath it, from selection processes and practical exercises to diversity, equity, inclusion and belonging, and employer branding, and you know, you've got the comp and bends element coming into it as well. So there's a lot to it, and our hiring managers are equally trying to do their own job and become recruitment recruiters when they're bringing people into their teams. You know, so there is a lot. Everyone's trying to do so much, and we are understanding more, which is great. And so it's just trying to make sure that we are make that knowledge accessible for people, and that they understand the importance of these things, and the value that it brings, and that it is worthwhile spending that time. You know, we know that we could, you know, tap into our networks, and that works sometimes to get referrals. But we also need to understand the limitations of that. And even if we are tapping into our networks, you know, to make sure that there's still a process that's there, to make sure that that candidate's right for this job. They might have been great for something that you've worked with them previously, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be right for this new environment. So what are still the selection process to test for that? And how do you make sure that you're still, you know, attracting more diversity into your pipeline, and the value that that would bring to your organization, so that it's not just all people who look the same and think the same.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a quick funny story on that. I used to work with a law firm based in the Channel Islands, offshore law firm, and they had in Cayman Islands and Gibraltar and all these tax havens. And it was the day when the HR director got an email from one of the partners based in the Cayman Islands that said, copied this guy in on an email and said, "Hey, I met John yesterday on the golf course. We had a few drinks in the clubhouse afterwards. I've offered him this job. Could you just deal with the paperwork?" I mean, that was the point where he went, "I need to put a stop to this."
Yeah. Or I need to go and work for another organization potentially, because
Yes.
there's probably quite a lot more embedded systemically in that organization, a lot to try to
Yes.
kind of unpick there. But
Yeah.
yes, yeah. I mean, I think it's only fair on the candidates as well, really.
Yeah.
Candidates are making a decision to leave a job often to join another company.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
want to know that this is right for them. So having
Yeah.
a robust selection process that tests that this is the right opportunity for them and we're right for them is important. This is not a one-way street. This is not just us, um, you know, selecting candidates. This is candidates selecting us. And first of all, they have to do that as to whether they apply for the job. So is our job advert clear? Did we clearly articulate what we stand for and what our culture is like and what the role is about and, the benefits and all of the rest of it. So, we need to do that part first to hope that candidates will select in or out. If that doesn't appeal to them, that's okay. I would rather have a higher quality of candidate than volume of candidates that are not as suitable. But yeah, it's absolutely a two-way process, and all through it, we are very conscious of that when we design our processes. And I think again, maybe that's partly, the sort of small scaling company mentality that, we know there's no given that if we offer a candidate a job and they're offered a job by another big corporate they will choose us over them. So, we are always, as I say, trying to punch above our weight and explain just how great it is, what the opportunity is, but also be really honest about, what it's really like to work with hyble, and so that you know whether that's for you or not. And yeah, as I say, just making sure that it really is a very open and two-way process throughout it.
Wonderful. Susan, thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that this has given some inspiration to other people in smaller scaling organizations. You don't just need to be a FTSE 100 company to be putting in rigorous enable processes in here. And by the way, I really believe that enabling hiring managers is going to be a big trend in recruiting for the future. So that's something that we've covered a couple of times recently on this channel, and I think we'll talk about it in with more velocity over the next year or so. So Susan, thank you again. Great to see you.
Pleasure. See you later.